All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, you may notice another new face. This is the incredibly awesome Mighty Jerd. He is a buddy of mine that I've known for years now. Jerd, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jeff Muller, known on the interwebs as the Mighty Jerd. I'm a East Coast-based actor, a role player, and shenanigan maker. That's pretty much me.
Uh, and we normally do plugging and stuff at the end, but I have to mention this. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you should. Mostly because, as a dungeon master, Jerd is the kind of dungeon master that likes not only having maps for his players, but having very cool maps. Like 3D terrain and bubbling and fog. Like, it's super, super cool, the stuff that this dude posts. So yeah, I had to mention that because one of my favorite things reading through Jerd's feed, other than the fact that being a former actor, I love seeing when he gets new work and talking about act. Like I could talk about acting for years, to be perfectly honest. Love it. But yeah, all of his stuff just looks amazing and makes me. And then when I think about what I do for my players, it's like, well, I do really cool voices.
Voices are awesome.
So yeah, cool stuff. But today we are going to be focusing on what a lot of people consider kind of the redheaded stepchild of D&D, which is the Bard. The Bard has a really interesting history in D&D, mostly because the Bard, much like some of the defining features we'll talk about in this a second here, the Bard does not like to fit into a slot very well. Like, the Bard likes to switch between things. Like, when the Bard was first introduced, I believe it was in second edition. Jeff, feel free to correct me anytime I do something wrong.
First,
First? Was it first?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm first.
When it was first introduced, it was a little bit closer to a rogue. And I know in second edition, it was fully kind of encapsulated in the kind of rogues class kind of the things. And it had a lot more in common with rogues, where it was very sneaky, but it still had the jack of all trades thing. And because that, it was this weird class that was sometimes fun to play, but just didn't feel very good. Third edition, I think. No, second edition, they also started introducing some of the spellcasting, but it was still kind of a minor spellcaster. Third edition, it kind of stayed in that, but started shifting slightly more towards the spellcasting, became a little bit better spellcaster. Fourth edition was weird, and now fifth edition Bard is one of the full spellcasters, which massively changes how it used to play. It
Yeah.
always had, kind of the ability to do a lot of different things, but adding full spell progression to it really turned it into something that could be a really, really versatile class. And then adding things like Bardic Inspiration and Jack of all trades into the things like that turned it into a class that a lot of people just don't know, don't know how to play. Because unlike, something like the paladin is super easy to figure out where it fits in the party. You have a couple different subclasses that will shift it, from either being your big sword and board, I will take damage for my team, or your vengeance paladin, I will smite those that I don't like. And that's really what you do. The bard, though, just, it can do a little bit of everything. And if you try and make it so that you can do everything, it becomes really underpowered and really useless as you get to higher levels, because you haven't really focused on, defining it into somewhere. Once you pick a path, it's super cool and fun. But if you kind of refuse to pick a path and just are always just doing as many different things, you're going to get a little bit overwhelmed. So yeah, do you have particular opinions on the Bard, Jeff?
The Bard in fifth edition. Now, listen,
Yes.
we were talking about early editions. First edition was crazy, just all around. First edition was
Yeah.
crazy. All right. I've been playing since 1980. I remember a decent amount about the Bard. No one ever played it because it had the weird requirements you had to get to, and you had to be a certain level to switch to a Bard. And no one lasted that long in first edition D&D anyway. So I don't remember how it played early on. I skipped the third and fourth editions. I was playing other games at the time, and then there was a stint where I wasn't role playing at all because life. But fifth edition, the Bard it's my favorite class, hands down, my favorite class. Um, I, I like the Bard because I think of almost all the classes, it has the most potential for flavor and personalization. Um, I mean, you can with any class, you can personalize and you can do things. Um, but the colleges themselves apply a very specific flavor to the Bard, which I think is nice. um, Unfortunately, it is a little complicated at first. It's not the, like you said, it's not the easiest class to sit down and put in a box. So for new players, it might be a little tough, which is a shame because I think for new players it's the easiest class to take in and then determine, like, man, I'm not quite sure how I want to play this. The colleges tell you right up front, well, here's how you can play this, as opposed to some of the other things which are a little more nebulous, but mechanically easier to play. But yeah, I love the Bard. It is without a doubt. I think especially for role playing purposes, I think the Bard is my favorite class, followed probably by the Cleric. There's just so many opportunities there.
Oh yeah, and I think kind of shifting back to the idea of homebrewing, one of the great thing about the colleges is, and I've talked about this in a couple other videos, when you are constructing a subclass for a class, the features that you put in can be used to kind of dictate how you want the player to use your particular subclass without doing specific things of you can only do this, you can only do that. If you incentivize certain things, they still have the option of doing other things, but they're going to be incentivized to play in a certain way. And the Bard does that better, literally, than any other
Right.
class. Even like we just did the sorcerer last week, and we talked about how the draconic sorcerer and the wild magic sorcerer play massively different right from level one because you pick them at level one,
Sure.
but they don't quite, they're not as easy to understand what you're supposed to do, especially like the wild magic. A lot of people think wild magic is, ooh, crazy stuff happens. No, wild magic is statistical manipulation, and is betting the odds. Like it is very much a gambling sort of subclass, and when you play it that way, you have a lot of fun. When you just go chaos, your party hates you after you drop the third fireball on them in a row. So yeah, that's something I love about the Bard. So before we get into the subclass, we need to talk about the defining features. Quick refresher on 5th edition class design. In 5th edition, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, they have these things that we call defining features. A defining feature is either something unique to the class, or maybe it's not unique, but the class gets it earlier or can use it in a different way than every other class. And in order for something to be a defining feature, it needs to show up within the first 2 levels. So the defining features for the Bard. We talked last week about the Sorcerer and how the spellcasting feature for the Sorcerer technically isn't a defining feature because it is identical, word for word, to the Bard spellcasting. And what makes spellcasting a defining feature for the Sorcerer is your subclass will add a defining feature to your Sorcerer. Well, Bards don't get their subclass until 3rd level, so the one kind of defining aspect of spellcasting that makes it different from Sorcerer is the Bard spell list is kind of unique. There are a few spells on there that don't show up on any other spell list, which is cool. And depending on your subclass, I think almost all the subclasses modify this spellcasting in some way, shape, or form. So according to my definition of defining feature, it's a very loose fit, but it's a full spellcaster. It has to be a defining feature. You can't play a full spellcaster without using your spellcasting as part of it. And even when we talk about some of the more martial-based subclasses, they still find ways to interact the magic with their martial abilities because it's a full spellcaster. That's how they work. The second defining feature is the one that everybody thinks about for the 5th edition Bard, which is Bardic Inspiration. Bardic Inspiration is really cool. It's a bonus action ability, meaning you actually have a use for your bonus action all the time. And with how important action economy is in 5th edition, even compared to earlier ones, having a constant use for your bonus action is always good. Effectively, you can give out it starts as a D6, it gets higher. You give out a D6, and players can use it to influence a number of rolls. I think almost every subclass, if not all of them, give you additional ways to use your Bardic Inspiration. The base version just lets them use it on ability checks, saving throws. Is it attack rolls too, or is that just Valor?
I think it's attack rolls.
I have it literally in front of me. I could read. Maybe I should do that. Ability check, attack roll, or saving throw. So, Bardic Inspiration, ability check, attack roll, or saving throw. And that, again, leans into something that I really, really like that isn't emphasized a ton in 5th edition, at least PHB 5th edition, which is what I call control subclasses, or control classes. In 4th edition, there was 4 categories of classes. You had defenders, your tanks. You had strikers, your damage dealers. You had leaders, who were your healers, and you had controllers, who just did cool shit. And I loved controllers. Bardic Inspiration leans into that controller thing by literally being able to go, okay, who is going to get the most benefit out of this? This person, I'm going to give them my Bardic Inspiration. And every subclass allows you to emphasize a little bit more on not only how you are going to play, but how the rest of your party is going to play. And that's the real trick of playing a bard, is a lot of times, very similar to the monk, you need to know the rest of your party almost as well as you know your class, because giving your Bardic Inspiration to maybe the ranger who already has archery style, so they're always hitting, maybe not the greatest thing compared to maybe giving it to the rogue, who, when they get that one hit, it turns into a sneak attack with lots and lots and lots of damage. So really knowing your party is important. When we move up to 2nd level for defining features, we get Jack of all trades. The other thing that has existed as part of the Bard since 2nd edition. Again, 1st edition Bard was weird. So I don't know how useful it was, but I know 2nd edition they started getting that Jack of all trades. 3rd and 4th edition, that was a big thing about the Bard, was Jack of all trades, which is effectively anything you're not proficient in, any skill you're not proficient in, you can add half your proficiency bonus to it. So bards can make checks other classes can't. Bards are going to make most of their skill checks simply because they're adding more numbers to all of them. It also means your bard can kind of pitch hit when maybe you have a player that has exhaustion and they're not going to be able to make the checks that they normally make for you. Maybe you just have a weak spot in your party where nobody specialized in intelligence. I had a party at a convention once where we just didn't have any intelligence-based characters, and the entire module we were playing had DC 20 investigation checks that you had to make or you couldn't proceed in the adventure. And we hated it because we just happened to not have any intelligence base. We had spellcasters. We just had no one that specialized in investigation. Sure. And it sucked. So yeah, bards can do all those things. And then the final defining feature, which this is the one that is another one of those defining features that is never touched again by the base class, by any of the subclasses. And I can kind of understand why, but this would be something I would love to see a subclass based around. Song of Rest. It's really simple. When you rest, your bard can allow you, if you burn a healing die, you can get extra hit points. It's nice, but a lot of people, there's a lot of parties that I have seen that don't use short rest anywhere near as much as they could. And even when they are short resting, they're thinking about like getting their key points back or getting their spells back as a warlock. They're not thinking about, oh, I can heal myself. It's the weirdest thing in the world I've seen in fifth edition where people forget that they have a self heal.
It also has to, I think in part, not to digress too
Mm-hmm.
much, but I think that that comes from the nature of 5e play. I think Song of Rest very much harkens back to the days of the mega dungeon delve,
Mm-hmm.
where your becomes resource management intensive. You don't see that very much in 5e, so I think that things like this tend to go by the wayside. And plus, a lot of people don't play the short rest rules correctly either, which is, you only get half of those hit dice back on a long rest. Most people forget that and just reset all the hit die anyway. So the resources are always there. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like one of those gimmies that, like, yeah, it's there, but it really doesn't factor into a lot of play,
Mm-hmm.
especially if people are playing the published modules.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I had an entire series I did where someone took all the Final Fantasy 14 classes and turned them into D&D classes. And one of the things we touched on when I was doing my D&D deep dives on them is hit dice is a resource that really isn't utilized in 5th edition anywhere near as much as it should be. And one of the classes, the Dark Knight, is supposed to like kind of hurt itself to do damage and stuff like that. And
Mm.
I think a really cool idea for a subclass for a number of different classes would be someone that uses your hit dice as a limited resource. Instead of having to introduce a new limited resource or something, simply having your hit dice be, well, you can burn your hit dice to get extra damage, or you can burn your hit dice to move again or something. I think is a really cool idea. And something like Song of Rest would interact with that really well because now you don't need to use as many hit dice to heal, so you can use them for other features. I think like a Blood Bard would be super cool. So yeah. Those are the defining features. The way I tend to do this is I like to start with. I've already talked about the PHB subclasses and how they kind of do cool stuff. As far as non-PHB subclasses, Jeff, do you have one that you tend to really enjoy that we can start with?
I love the Eloquence Bard.
Eloquence,
I
yes.
The thing that has always bothered me about there's a couple things that bother me about 5e bards. One is that it's all in a magic using class, which 5e seems to be like everyone is a every single class and every subclass is a magic using class. I would love to see a bard college that doesn't have magic at all. Now, I don't know how I would homebrew it. I don't know how I would build it. I don't know how it would work, but it bothers me a little bit that they're so magic heavy and reliant. But the other thing is everyone always thinks of bards as having to sing. And I was playing oration bards long before, Tasha's and or Theros, whichever one it um, came out. Because to me, bard isn't about singing. The singing aspect is a flavor that you add on to the core construct of what a bard is, which is a storyteller. Now, whether they tell that story via words, poets, poems, sonnets, songs, whatever, musical riffs that have no lyrics, whatever, there's a million ways to express it, but it's always been about storytelling. So to finally see Wizards say, you know what, not everyone has to be Scanlan,
Mm-hmm.
not everyone is going to be Sam Riegel at the table wanting to bust out songs, was nice. Now, granted, from a power gaming standpoint, is Eloquence probably the best bard out there? No. But then again, I don't care about that sort of stuff. So yeah, Eloquence, hands down,
Oh,
favorite
definitely.
favorite bard subclass.
Um, and to kind of touch on something you mentioned before, simply because I've seen this in some of the Final Fantasy 14 subclasses, with spell casting. Again, spellcasting is such an intrinsic part of a fifth edition. They have specific rules around it because of how the sorcerer works and the quicken spells and all that. Like, it is a really big part. However, at its base, spellcasting is a form of a limited resource. The same way you have key
Right.
points, sorcery points, maneuver dice for your Battlemaster fighters. And if you wanted to create a bard that was less dependent on magic, because it's a full spellcaster, you can't completely remove the magic if it's going to be a bard. But if your subclass features gave you different ways to use spell slots akin to a paladin smite, paladins very rarely cast spells, but they love their spell slots. Say, well, if you burn this level spell slot, you can do this. That might be a really interesting way to take a little of the magic out while not having to build a brand new class, like not having to build a Scald class or something.
Right.
So, yeah, I like that idea. That being said, I also love the idea of non-singing bards. You know, I built a bard back when I used to play Adventures League. I built a Spanish bard based on Antonio Banderas, and I tried to come up with a Spanish accent. Spanish accent is really hard, especially. And this was before I had the stutter. Now speaking that fast with a stutter is not happening. But the thing that my bard did for inspiration was he was just really, really good with words. And his inspirations were generally, he would say nice things about people.
Right.
And I love that, especially since, from my experience in management, the ability to pick the correct words at the right time for the right person, management and sales both go hand in hand in this, is so much more useful than any other kind of trick tactic you can use to manipulate people. Simply looking at people, knowing what it is that motivates them, and knowing the things to say that will interact with those motivations is unbelievably useful. And so I love the idea that someone can magically know exactly what to say to give the person exactly the boost that they need. Like, I think that's such a great idea.
Words of encouragement. It's the best bardic inspiration ever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hands down.
So, looking at the actual features of the class, the subclass, you start out with two things at third level. You get Silver Tongue, which is kind of a version of something that bards eventually get, where effectively anytime you make a persuasion or deception check, you can treat a d20 roll of 9 or lower as a 10. I think rogues get something similar to that
later on in their levels,
much later, but
much later.
There really isn't a way to underplay how useful that is. Especially since a lot of people don't quite understand nat 1s only matter for attack rolls. As far as the rules of 5th edition, now, whatever you want to do in your home game is perfectly fine. But nat 1s are only auto failures on attack rolls. For skill checks, you can roll a nat 1, but if you are a bard with expertise and proficiency, there's a good chance you will still get on a nat 1. I've seen nat 1s turn into 15s and 16s.
Oh, easy.
For rogues and bards are the two that can do that super well. So with this, especially if you get expertise in either persuasion, deception, or both, means a lot of times your minimum roll on any of these is a 20 or 25. And that means there are a lot of situations that you can get into that a lot of other characters can't, because there's really no chance that you're going to epically fail most of these things, which is super fun. I will say for homebrewing, be careful about what you allow to cancel out nat 1s and low rolls in general. Persuasion and deception are good things for that, but a lot of people hate rogues specifically because they will expertise in stealth, and that will mean that their minimum stealth roll is like a 27. And passive perception on any monster, I've never seen a passive perception that's 27. So a lot of people will treat that as rogues are just invisible all the time, which isn't true, but it annoys a lot of people. So if you are homebrewing and you want to do something a little like this, understand what skills you're giving it to, because that can, first of all, it can help define the class. Like, again, Silver Tongue, Persuasion, Deception, there isn't a performance in there. Again, this isn't a singing bard, so you've already kind of pivoted this bard into, all right, we want you talking. We want you talking a lot. Whether you're being truthful or whether you're lying through your teeth, this is a talky bard.
Yep.
And this is a really effective way to do that. You've highly incentivized talking.
And it also gives an avenue, a mechanical avenue for players that don't feel comfortable doing the deep role play on stuff like that. I mean, very often bards fall into this weird um, area of play where DMs very often will expect the player to role play out the deception or role play out. I love doing that. But I've also had players at the table that aren't good at that and they're not good at thinking on their feet. That doesn't mean their character isn't. So this incentivizes using those skills that perhaps they don't feel comfortable doing as a role play thing, as a mechanical aspect of the game, it's nice to see that in there. No one asks the fighter at the table, well, show me how you would swing the sword. So it feels weird sometimes when people ask, the bard player, well, explain to me how you're going to deceive this guard. Maybe that character or that player isn't good at it. So having this ability to remind them, oh yeah, this is what my character is good at, incentivizes that type of play, which I like.
Definitely. And I think that's another thing that I don't see a lot of subclasses kind of focusing on. I think maybe in Tasha's, there might have been like a paragraph or two where they've talked about the idea of you are not your character, and there are some instances where your character would know things better. Generally, the only time you see that is in DM supplements, where they will go, well, a dumb DM can play a smart villain, and there are ways to do that, but
Sure.
it takes a little bit of work, and building a subclass around the idea, or even just mentioning in your subclass things like, oh, by the way, just because you are not an incredibly persuasive person, or you are not good at lying, which are both really difficult things in real life. Like anyone that's worked sales knows, persuasion is an art form. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of work to get good at it. The same is true about lawyers, doctors even have to understand how to persuade people. Lying is even more difficult. Lying is probably the most difficult thing you can learn to do effectively. So yeah, understanding that your players are not their characters, and this is something I tell my players all the time. Listen, just because you don't know how to do this doesn't mean your character can't. If you go, I want to come up with a way to say this or to do this, I go, okay, make a check. I will give you the words because this is something that I'm very good at. Or we'll just pretend that you said something really, really good that neither one of us could come up with. That's perfectly fine. So, yeah. Moving forward, unsettling words is the other thing that you get. And this is the thing that modifies your bardic inspiration. And this specifically deals with saving throws. Basically, as a bonus action, you point to a creature within 60 feet, you roll your bardic inspiration die, and then the next saving throw it makes before the start of your next turn, they subtract that number. At third level, your bardic inspiration is only a d6, but it gets up to a d12 eventually.
It is a clutch, ability that, man, can really turn the tide, especially in a boss fight. Oh, it is a chef's kiss. I love that ability.
And this is another one. Again, this is a control ability. This is an action economy manipulator as well, because when you know not only your party, but you know the order of who's coming next, you know who this is going to be most beneficial for. And this is another thing where the rest of the party needs to be keyed in on what you're doing. Because, again, I play monks. I love monks. They're super, super fun in 5th edition. Stunning Strike is the thing that DMs hate that I love. And as a DM, I love it too. It's people turn it into something that it's not, but it's really fun. But let's say you're playing your Elloquence Bard. You use this, they get a -10 to their saving throw. The next person in line is the wizard, and after that is the monk. Or if the wizard throws their fireball, this person's going to get the lesser saving throw on the fireball, which is nice, but fireball doesn't do a ton of individual damage. It's widespread damage. And so the wizard casting fireball is going to hurt the team as a whole, because it'll be much, much more useful for the monk to get a stunning strike off than it will for them to take full damage instead of half damage from off of a fireball. So this is another one that really encourages group play. And when you are creating homebrew options, focusing on things that require the rest of the party to be keyed in, I think are really, really good. It provides a much more teamwork focused group and situation at the table.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing to me about, we said it at the beginning, but bards are about storytelling, but storytelling is communication. So just the nature of the fact that the bard is a communicator, you would think that, from a role-playing perspective, assuming they literally didn't just meet the group they're in, that they would kind of have this ability to know just intrinsically like what everyone's abilities are, because they're building these stories in their head. I love that flavor to this.
Yeah, I mean, this is another reason I'm not a huge fan. Don't get me wrong. Sam Riegel is a genius. Scanlan is a super, super fun character. He did not play the character wrong in any way, shape, or form. In fact, the story that I have heard about why he was a gnome bard was he turned to I can't even remember who it was. He asked someone, and he goes, "What is like the worst class?" And they go, "Bard."
Yeah.
And what would be like the worst kind of bard? Well, a gnome bard. He literally decided to play the suboptimal character, and he turned into the linchpin in so many different situations. If you watched the Legend of Vox Machina animated show that came out recently, they show probably the first time that everyone started realizing, holy crap, Scanlan is amazing.
Yeah, not a joke.
Yeah,
an actual like clutch member of the team. Yes.
He literally changed the entire situation of the campaign at that point by single-handedly fighting off an entire mansion full of baddies. And he just kept failing forward over and over again. And I remember watching it live, and it was one of the most interesting things ever. And then watching the animated version of it, it was so cool. That's what understanding your party does.
Yes.
Scanlan not only understood his party, Scanlan understood bad guys. And that's another thing that I think a lot of DMs will disincentivize simply with the idea, well, that's metagaming. Yes, but understanding your enemy is something that, and I mention this all the time with magic users using charm spells and other things like that. For charm spells to exist, and with how effective they can be, especially when you start talking about dominate spells, everyone in the world is aware that they exist. They cannot not be aware that they exist because of just how massively different they make interactions. And so there are certain things that it doesn't matter if they've never seen this spellcaster, they've never seen this particular stat block. There are certain things that you will just intrinsically know existing in this world. The idea, like, it's one of the reasons I hate critical fumble tables, because the idea of someone that makes their living with a weapon, somehow one every 20 times they swing it, they hurt themselves, can't exist. That kind of person would not make it to level 2. Like, by the time they turn 20, they would be missing 3 limbs. It's not something that's realistic. It's not something that's fun. It's meant to just punish players for things that they don't have control over, which is a die roll. And that's the same thing about, yes, I understand if you're going and looking up every monster in the monster manual, that's cheating. That's not fun. Don't do that. But especially a bard, bards know stories, bards know legends, bards know rumors. So yeah, I do think knowing, okay, well, these are humans, and I'm going to guess because they're using big weapons, they're probably going to have low wisdom scores. Or having a quick conversation and realizing, oh, this guy's dumb as a box of rocks. I could
Right.
probably use intelligence-based saving throws against them. That's a bard thing to do,
Yeah.
and you really should be. And again, unsettling words is a perfect way to do that. Moving forward, unfailing inspiration is an RNG manipulator that I love, mostly because effectively what it does when you when you give someone a bardic inspiration, they use it and they fail, they keep the inspiration. Bardic inspiration lasts for 10 minutes. What that means is something that a lot of players will do is they'll have their bardic inspiration there, but they'll hold on to it thinking, okay, well, I don't know if this is the best role to use that on. It's not quite as bad as what I call the elixir paradox, which is basically in games like Final Fantasy, there's these things called elixirs, which give you full hit points, full magic points, but there's a limited number of them in the game. You
Hmm.
cannot buy them, they don't drop off of enemies, there's only like 10 in the entire game. What invariably happens is you get to the final boss and you've got all 10 in your inventory and you've just never used them because, well, these are super important. And if I use it now, maybe I won't have it when I need it later on.
Do not call out my video game strategy, sir. Like I feel attacked and I don't like it.
It's it's how it works, and so it's one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of what I call one and done abilities that you only get one use per long rest, because statistically people won't use them. Even if you just turn it to two uses instead of one between long rests, players will use the second use significantly more often because it's not as special anymore. They don't feel like I can only use
That's
this
valid.
in the exact place. Unfailing inspiration gives that ability to your bardic inspiration. Even if you roll a 2 on your die, it's like, well, I'd have to roll like a 10 on my bardic inspiration to do this. There's no reason. I don't want to waste it. No, with unfailing inspiration, roll it every single time.
Right.
And make sure that your bardic inspiration always gets used. It's never wasted. So I like that. I'm just looking at the next one, which is universal speech. And this is another one that your mileage may vary depending on your DM. I have run campaigns where knowing multiple languages is a huge benefit. For no other reason than in the middle of a conversation, you can say something in Elvish to your elven friend, and the dwarf in front of you won't understand what you're saying.
Right.
I've run other campaigns where we've never looked at their languages at all. And I've seen this spread everywhere. Me personally, I like languages. I think they're incredibly useful.
Me too.
And so universal speech can be something that's incredibly useful, especially since this particular it specifically says to make your speech intelligible to any creature. The chosen creature can magically understand you regardless of the language you speak for an hour. That means you can, depending on how your DM wants to interpret this, you theoretically could have a made-up language that you could speak. You could speak ubby-dubby, and the creatures that you choose will be able to understand you while no one else will. The same thing can be done if you just learn a really obscure language, something like abyssal or deep speech when you are not in the underdark. Just being able to say that there's so many fun things you can do with universal speech. Running the scam of, oh, this is a foreign dignitary that doesn't speak, I am his translator, and you just go, or you turn to the Swedish chef, and then you can say whatever you want to your allies, and literally you can use all of your bardic abilities of being able to know what people are saying and being able to kind of tell where things are and tell all of your pals what you want them to know, and no one will be the wiser. Like, that is a super fun grift to do.
It really is. And like you said, I think this is very DM dependent. I also think languages are super important, and nothing was more frustrating in earlier editions of D&D where, for those of you that maybe have only played fifth edition, early editions of D&D, you got experience for gold. Like you tried to avoid combat a lot. So it wasn't just about killing the baddies. So it was very frustrating in older editions where there would be a language barrier that would prevent you from being able to talk your way out of a situation. And therefore combat was the only way to solve things. It's nice to have a type of character here that can circumvent all of that. And should there be a diplomatic, approach to things, that languages won't become a barrier. And I like that. I think it makes this particular bard very special in that regard. It really can change the entire way that your party approaches literally everything in a campaign once this ability unlocks.
Well, and another thing you always need to be thinking about when you're building your own subclasses: how is this going to affect earlier things? When we go back up to Silver Tongue, you already have minimum persuasion and deception checks. Now you also have the ability to speak to anyone that you want to.
Yeah.
And another thing that I think, like, a lot of people see persuasion is I'm going to sleep with them, and deception is I am going to betray them. And yes, that can be what you do. However, again, from without going into aspects of my past I'm not 100% proud of, deception is a lot more than just betrayal.
Oh yeah.
One of the most effective ways to, and we're seeing this now without getting political, we're seeing this now, is being able to control what people are aware of and convincing them to believe your lies is significantly more useful than being able to get them to like you or anything like that. You can get someone that absolutely hates you. If you can convince them that someone else hates them more than they hate you, you can change a relationship instantly. In universal speech, talking to someone in their own language, I'm not kidding. I sold a computer once in French. I don't speak French almost at all anymore. I've forgotten most of it. When I was almost fluent, I was conversational in French.
Sure.
I was not really great at speaking
Right.
French. However, I was living in Milwaukee, working in a store that was somewhat close. It was in Milwaukee, which has General Mitchell International Airport. It is one of the larger international airports in the country. Not O'Hare or anything like that, but it's big, and it's an international airport. So we had people from all over the world coming to Milwaukee. And so I had someone from France show up, and I sold them a computer in French. I would not have sold the computer if I spoke to them in English, despite the fact that they spoke better English than I
Right.
do.
Sure.
Speaking to someone in their own language changes how things work. And as a DM, you should be aware of that. And that's one of the big things about your universal speech is technically you're not speaking their language, but as far as they know, you are.
Right. Right.
And that's a really big deal.
And coupling that, like you said, with the deception and the persuasion. And just to kind of hit on that, I had a player who brand new to RPGs, right? She started playing, 5e came out. I started a campaign. She was married to someone who wanted to come in and play. She had never played before, was very confused by all the skills and everything else. And she asked me for an explanation of what the difference was between persuasion and deception when she was trying to do something. My answer was, who the target is going to be mad at when they find out it is wrong. Are they going to be mad at themselves? Oh my God, I can't believe that I made this decision. Or are they going to be mad at you? Oh, I can't believe you made me believe this little bit of info or whatever else. And to me, that's really the difference there is who gets the blame at the end of the day when it comes to, comes out in the light.
I am 100% stealing that. I love that explanation. It is so good, and it's so true. And it's another thing that a lot of people. I don't like lies at all. First girl I dated was a pathological liar. If you want a life-changing experience, date a pathological liar because they will lie about things that there's no reason to lie about them because they literally cannot help themselves. They have to.
Sure.
It makes you question everything.
Right.
Like, oh, I'm hungry. Do you want to get something to eat? Why are you hungry? What purpose would this hunger have in influencing me? It was super weird and it messed me up. So the quickest way to get me to not like you is to lie to me, and because of dating a pathological liar, I am one of the most difficult people to lie to. I catch people lying a lot. That being said, everybody lies. To take the house quote, everybody lies. And lying is a really comfortable thing for a lot of people because there are certain aspects of them that they're embarrassed about that they don't think are good enough, and so they will lie readily about it. Using deception not only to influence people, but simply to make them think you know something that you don't. Like, that is one of the most useful lies in the world. It's very rarely done. But again, with universal speech, you can do that in a way to make them think that you are saying something only to them. That idea of, I'm really sorry that, this conversation isn't going really well. It would really, really suck if your daughter found out about it. They don't know what I just said. This is a conversation between you and me, and I'd love it to stay between you and me. Things like that. You don't need to know anything about. You just need that little thing of truth, and universal speech can turn that into a very different. That's a very, very different kind of bard. And you eventually have to kind of come to terms with what that means as a character. But it can be, like, playing characters like that, hyper manipulative characters, can be really, really fun.
The eloquence part 100% can turn into Darth Bard so easy. 100%.
Yeah. Finally, and this is a nice thing about Bard subclasses, is there's not a ton of features to them. Most of them only have 3 features. This one is unique in the fact that it has 5, because this Bard has such a heavy emphasis on non-combat encounter stuff. Everything up to 14th level has a second non-combat ability. However, when you get to 14th level, you get Infectious Inspiration. Effectively, a creature within 60 feet of you uses one of your Bardic Inspiration dice. You can use your reaction to give another creature a Bardic Inspiration die without using a Bardic Inspiration die. You basically have extra reaction-based Bardic Inspiration die, and you can use it a number of times equal to your Charisma. So you get 5 of them per little long rest. So it effectively means your Bardic Inspiration die has just increased by 5 as long as you use your reaction. And again, talking about action economy, having a use for your reaction is really, really good. It means you have an extra action that you can take advantage of. And by 14th level, that's a D12 inspiration die. That is going to change. That's going to change roles. So your thoughts?
I'm not the hugest fan of this one. The more I play 5th edition, the less I like the amount of toggle switches people have on a turn, because it slows down things at the table. Then you get into conversations about, who should get the second, inspiration, and it starts slowing things down. Now, this isn't anywhere near as egregious as things like druids with 30 summon creatures and everything else that just makes it boring for everyone at the table. It's not that bad, but it's starting to approach that more metagaming conversations around who should get the next thing. I'm not a huge fan of. I understand its purpose. As a DM, not my favorite thing to see happening at the table.
I totally get that. And I again, and this is something that it's one of the reasons why a lot of DMs, at least my opinion, a lot of DMs don't like running high level, like high tier 3 and tier 4 D&D, because you start getting, especially in combat, you start getting this thing where combat turns into basically what it was in 3rd edition. 3rd edition, one of the reasons I have a strong dislike for the 3rd edition. It's not a bad edition. Don't get really mad.
Everyone at him on Twitter right now.
But one of the things I didn't like about 3rd edition was the massive number of floating modifiers, because it turned into a simple thing like firing your bow to hit an enemy into this massive conversation of, well, don't forget you're firing into combat, so that's going to give you this. But I have this feat, so that's going to cancel this out. But then I also have this, and I have this, and it just wasn't fun.
Yeah, too crunchy. Yep.
So with Infectious Inspiration, anything that starts turning into, okay, I have 7 different things that I have to do on my turn instead of action, bonus action, movement. One of the things that I found makes it significantly easier is, again, encouraging the party to pay attention during combat. The conversation of, well, who should get it next and things like that happens when people aren't paying attention. He's like, well, wait, what just happened? Oh, okay, then some of the things that I've seen, and I've done this when I've been running like 7 and 8 person to the tables, which I do not recommend, especially if you're new DM, but even it's rough running big tables. Is I would give just like a flat +1 bonus to whatever you wanted to do, because +1 is not going to make or break the game, but it incentivizes them. Okay, if you can tell me and get your turn done and basically start the rolling aspect of your turn, the end of it, within 30 seconds, a minute, choose your time limit that you want. You're going to get a bonus to this. And it's amazing how much everyone will pay attention, because a minute is both a really long time and not a long time at all, depending on what's going on. And simply going, okay, it's your turn, go. And if they're not ready instantly to know what they're doing, they have that conversation. Well, who should get it? Well, I should get it. Okay, well, you're going to lose out on your thing.
Right.
And then again, things like unsettling words and other things that kind of encourage the party to work together and know what's going on in combat. It's another thing what was it? Call the Netherdeep, the new Critical Role book that launched. One of the things I love about it is the enemy party that you deal with. There's a section in the appendixes which actually has little quips that they make on their turn, which is an intrinsic part of combat for me. Jeff, being an actor and having done action, something that a lot of people that are not familiar with film combat or stage combat is the idea that combat tells a story in the same way that dialogue does, in the same way that songs do. And if you are creating a combat scene that is not telling a story, it's not going to feel good. Like your combat should.
Yeah.
And so that aspect of combat being a story needs to also exist in your D&D games. Every time an enemy attacks, they have a motivation for why they're attacking. They have a goal that they're making, and that attack, that movement, is part of the story they're telling. And so if you boil combat down to, okay, let's see which pool of hit points gets lower faster, it's really boring. Even at low levels, it's really boring. But as you get to higher level to the D&D and things like that, stop making your lose condition everybody dies. That's a boring lose condition, and high level D&D, it's not going to happen. It's super hard to kill players at high level. But when you start making lose conditions of, well, there's you guys have 4 turns until this spell goes off and bad things happen. Or this big dude in front of you is trying to stop you from getting to the real bad guy who's running out the back entrance. You've got, 6 turns before he's so far away you're not going to find him again. Or there are 12 kids that are underneath a spike, a spike that's slowly lowering. You've got 3 turns before it gets there. How are you going to stop that while dealing with these dudes that are trying to kill you? By doing things like that, or something I've done in a few of my games, actually putting a timer. Don't do it all the time. This will annoy the hell out of your players. Right. But for certain combat encounters, going, okay, and you have to tell them beforehand, this combat is only going to last half an hour. Doesn't matter if everyone takes 1 turn in half an hour or 70. Combat ends in half an hour.
Sure.
So whatever you need to do, it needs to be done in half an hour because poison gas is coming in or because they're running away.
Right.
Come up with a lore reason for it. But it really helps to deal with infectious inspiration and things like that. Counterspell's another one that a lot of DMs don't like because it turns into why counterspell? Why counterspell the counterspell? Why counterspell that counterspell? Okay, fine. Reactions have a mixed thing. But understand that as the DM, there are so many different ways that you can create tension that makes it disadvantageous. There's a word in there somewhere.
There is.
Don't know what it is, but it's in there. You all know what I mean. So remember that. And again, going back to the homebrew idea, if you are going to add abilities that require knowledge of the party, again, it encourages you to understand the party, but it can also encourage table talk and things like that. So understand when you're adding these things, you need to understand the full breadth of thing. It's the same reason why the quote unquote minion mancer is, when you talk about it online, it's the most powerful thing in 5th edition, where you're summoning 70,000 creatures and action economy and all that. It is so insanely rare to see it played at the table because it's just not fun.
No, it's the worst. And
So,
I don't want to change this from from talking positively about bards to hating on that at the table. Yeah, it's the worst.
but again, from a homebrew perspective, you need to understand that what you're building may not be used the way that you want. So remember, encourage things like earlier in the class, we're encouraging the player to know their party as well as they can. So by the time you get to Infectious Inspiration, you should already have a party that knows each other pretty well because you've already encouraged it earlier in the class. So if you are going to do something like this, put in things earlier in the class that's going to encourage them to already know their party so that you're not having the table talk as much. You can't get rid of table talk. It's just not possible. But again, there are two different ways to kind of change behavior. You have reinforcement and you have punishment. And there's two different flavors. There's positive and negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment. Reinforcement is always more effective in motivation and manipulation. This is pure psychology of management. It's what I have my degree in. Reinforcement is always more effective than punishment. And all that means is reinforcement is you give something, punishment is you take something away. That's all it means from a psychological perspective. So if you want to encourage players to do something, reinforce it, don't punish. Punish makes them bitter, reinforce. So incentivize the positive things you want them to do. Encourage them to know the party better, as opposed to limiting them by going, no, you don't get this. Anyway.
Very valid. Yep.
So I get to use my management stuff every so often. So that's College of Eloquence.
Yeah.
I actually want to go in the other direction simply because the last video I talked about College of Valor, which is your kind of sword bard in the PHP. And again, it harkens back to the older versions of the bard, which was much more roguelike.
Right.
College of Swords, however, is a whole different beast. And a lot of people confuse the two. The College of Valor bard is a kind of sword bard, but the College of Swords is much closer to a 3rd edition, what do they call, prestige class called the Blade Dancer.
Yeah.
And that's where people start having to think things a little bit differently. Again, the Valor Bard, you get combat inspiration. People can use your bardic inspiration on damage rolls, which can be super good, especially if you give it to like a paladin, where when they crit, they can put in their bardic inspiration. It turns into 2 damage dice, and then they also smite on top of that. Crit-based creatures classes work really well with combat inspiration. And then they get battle magic as their top thing. When you look at College of Swords, they get bonus proficiencies just like the Valor Bard, but it's significantly more limited. It's medium armor and just the scimitar. But if you're proficient with a simple or martial melee weapon, you can use it as a spellcasting focus for your bard spells. This is a really big deal, mostly because of how somatic components work, and specifically the War Mage feat. If you are casting a spell that has somatic components or material components, you have to have a hand free to do the somatic components or to get the material components. Now, with spellcasting focuses, you can ignore most material components, but you still have to have something that allows you to do the somatic components. So you have to have that focus in your hand. When you turn your weapon into a spellcasting focus, you no longer need a free hand to cast spells.
Right.
Which means this is really the only dual wielding bard that can take full advantage of their spells.
Yeah.
Which can be really cool. And then when you start looking at Blade Flourish, which is the other thing they have these 3 different things that allow you to burn a bardic inspiration to change your attack. Let you do something different. Each one of them adds a little bit of extra damage, which is always nice. But each one also gives you something else. Defensive Flourish increases your AC by your bardic inspiration. A +1 or a +2 to your AC is really nice. A +12 to your AC is mind-boggling. You become unhittable. Slashing Flourish allows you to hit effectively multiple creatures. They have to be right next to each other. Not quite as useful. Mobile Flourish. You hit someone and you move them 5 feet plus your inspiration die. And then you move with them. This is a control ability. These are the things I like. Being able to control where the enemies are standing is really, really useful. I cannot overemphasize how much battlefield control changes things. You can use Mobile Flourish to put someone in fireball formation or lightning bolt formation. You can use this to push them off a cliff.
There we go.
It's the
Or
one.
my favorite is into a cloud of daggers. I
Yeah.
loved it.
Definitely. There's so many different things. Pushing them across thorns or pushing them into thorns. Like, there's so many different things you can do. The one time I've had a character die in the Adventures League, I was playing my monk. I had a Yeti stun me, grapple me, and throw me off a 200-foot cliff. Insta-death. There was no save. I took 200 feet. I took 20 d6 falling damage. I insta-died. I splatted. Cliffs and things like that are super, super useful. Another thing that a lot of people will forget about is just the fact that you can't move through an enemy square. So pushing an enemy to the point where they can't get past you or they can't get past one of your allies massively changes how combat works, especially when you're dealing with melee fighter things. If you bottleneck them in a place where the only person that they can attack is your large sword and board paladin who just happens to have Armor of Faith cast on him by the cleric and just keeps using the dodge action as he sits there with his shield, he gets to sit there and just go ting, ting, ting as you guys lob grenades and spells over him. So understand, things like that. And when you're looking at homebrewing, this has highly incentivized getting into the thick of things. A lot of spellcasters will stay back. Cutting Words, which is the bard cantrip, you can hit from really far away, and it's a super useful spell. This is going to encourage you. Maybe you don't want to use your action to cast spells. Maybe you want to get in, and again, Defensive Flourish can mean that you can sit there and have a super high AC as they are wasting their attacks trying to hit you. So yeah, moving up, they get extra attack because if they're going to make it, if they're going to make you use your attack action once you get to about level 5 or 6, if you don't have extra attack, you can't compete. It's just how 5th edition works. And then 14th level, you get Master's Flourish, which is basically if you want to use a Blade Flourish, instead of expending an inspiration die, you can just roll a d6. Which at that point is half of what you would be rolling. You would be rolling a d12, but it means that you always have access to your flourish options, which means even compared to 9th level spells, which you won't have access to then, you'll be at 7th or 8th level spells at 14th, but you'll be getting them eventually. It means your flourishes are still going to be useful. even
Well,
at high
it
levels.
also means that your party will stop getting angry at you for being selfish and using your bardic
Mm-hmm.
inspirations on yourself instead of handing them out like candy, which is what is expected of a bard
Oh
generally.
yeah, I didn't even think about that. So that's another thing. And again, when you're thinking of homebrewing, adding something like this, as you create options for your subclasses, I generally tend to think the best subclasses introduce something cool at third level whenever you get it, and then as you level up, they add more uses to it or they do something to make it better every time you level up in this subclass. And Master's Flourish is a perfect example of that, to where if I'm going to be playing a College of Swords bard, I want to use my swords. I want to do cool things
Right.
with my swords. Like, that's the whole point of the College of Swords bard. And if you're limited to just your bardic inspiration, which you get back on a short rest, but it's still a limited resource, this turns it into, gives you a lesser version that you can always use. So you can always do the cool things that are the defining feature of your subclass. You never want to
Yeah.
create a defining feature of a subclass and then go, okay, you can only ever use this once.
True, true. I think where things like the College of Swords and a couple of the other colleges really point to for me is that Wizards is solving for a problem. And that problem is that multi-classing is an optional thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think personally, I think bards function best as a multi-class option. I think personally, having a bard, dipping a couple levels into bard, narratively is easy to justify, which I think is important for multi-classing. I hate it when people just, all of a sudden I'm a sorcerer for one level. I dip into that. Really? Well, can you explain that one to me? There, now we're 13th level, and now Draconic Heritage just happens to happen. Like, come on, guys. But Bard's an easy one because it allows you to add flavor to any other class. It allows you to take the fighter, the wizard, the cleric, and turn them into the skill monkey, the talker, the face of the party. Um, I specifically like this one though because um, adding the ability to turn your weapon into your spellcasting focus, huge bonus and benefit there. But still, even with that, I think these subclasses exist because they're not expecting people or not expecting multiclassing to be the norm. Where I think a lot of that, the sword and valor bards are just watered down fighters. I think you would have a more enjoyable time because you hit on it. If you don't get a second attack, you're lagging behind. Everyone wants to keep up with the Joneses, right? Everyone wants to be on par with everyone else in their group and not feel useless. I honestly think that a couple levels in Bard with your fighter gives you a much more enjoyable experience than trying to play a straight up sword bard long term if that's the type of play you enjoy. I don't know. I
No,
think
I
some of the
go ahead.
bard classes, subclasses to me, I look at and go, you're just trying to create a whatever class and bard hybrid by doing it in a subclass where it's better suited to be done as a multi-class.
Makes sense. See, and this is one of the reasons why I'm trying to get as many different voices in this little sub series as I can, because I am not a huge fan of multiclassing for this specific reason that there's two different worlds of D&D. There is what I call the I can't remember what they were called now, the forum D&D, and then and I'll explain what I mean in a second. And then I have the actual in-game D&D. What I mean by that is something that Chris Perkins said a few years ago when he was talking about the difference between fifth edition and earlier editions of D&D. Way back when the internet was new, you had these things called forums. They were kind of like a Discord channel, but they existed on the internet. And before that, you had messaging boards.
Yeah.
And D&D was a really popular topic. They even had
Mm-hmm.
things like play-by-post RPGs in general, which is
Yep.
really interesting, but it is a very, very different feeling to any other thing. It's such a unique experience that I don't think it's even comparable to playing at a table. It's very different.
It's a different game.
Yeah, it's a different game. So that being said, in earlier editions, and it kind of peaked in third edition, when you would talk about D&D online, generally in message boards and forums, you would talk about builds. You would go, "Oh, I have a 3-bard 4-fighter 2 wizard that does this, this, and this." In 5th edition, on forums still exist, they're just not as big. And in Discord servers and on Twitter, people talk about the story. "Oh, I'm playing this cool wild magic sorcerer that went into this thing," and that has been the huge kind of pivot between 3rd edition and some 4th edition tried to do this pivot, and then 5th edition kind of succeeded in doing this pivot. Is the idea that D&D is not a combat simulator. It can be used that way, but that is not its sole function. And multi-classing for me, when I've seen it discussed in the conversation I've had, multi-classing generally tends to be talked about in that 3rd edition build idea. And I'm not saying that's how everyone treats it, because I've seen some multi-classes have been super cool. Like when you look at what Vax did in the first campaign, how he multi-classed into a paladin, that was such a cool thing. And it was not done because it was, the most mechanically benefit thing for a rogue to go paladin. It's kind of a weird thing to do. But it added to his character so much, and all the abilities that he used, he had a purpose for it. And so that version of multi-classing is super, super cool and interesting.
Well, that's kind of, you're talking about I've always looked at it, kind of the same. You're calling it 4M D&D and kind of this modern day. I've always looked at it as system mastery versus storytelling.
Yep.
So same thing, right? I hate multi-classing for system mastery. I think that's silly. I mean, don't try and min-max your character to death. I mean, that's fine. If you're playing in a group where everyone does that, cool. If you're the lone guy at my table that's trying to do that, I will try and stamp that out because it drives me insane. And when I play, I don't care about the system mastery. I'm an actor. I'm caring about the story and whatever. And I find that multi-classing allows you to create characters very easily that represent what you're trying to do. The origins of D&D were all about that Appendix N, I believe it was, in the first AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide. Gary Gygax said, "These are the books that inspired me." And what he was trying to do was simulate these characters and these things that he saw in fiction. And I find that very often I want to emulate an idea, but when I look at a specific class by itself, it doesn't give me what I'm trying to emulate from a concept perspective. Absolutely. And I feel that the Bard is one of those classes that is easily multi-classed into to give you enough flavor, to give you something a little different to the regular classes that maybe will help you realize this vision that you have for what you want this character to accomplish or what you want this character to be.
I totally could get that. I get my experience in 5th edition. I mentioned before we went live, I actually used to help run a convention. I got to the point where I was in charge of all the quote-unquote organized play, which meant D&D Adventure League, Pathfinder Society, Shadowrun missions, or I can't remember what they were called. Shadowrun has an organized play group as well. There were issues with the person that was supposed to do our Shadowrun stuff the year I was involved with it, and so I'm not as familiar with it because they ditched our convention. But my experience, and again, living in Wisconsin where D&D started, we have tons of role-playing conventions. We do.
Right.
And I used to do what I called the convention circuit, where starting in around like late March, or actually mid-March, through around September, October, I would just go to conventions every couple of weeks. And here's a little tip. If you want to go to a convention and you can't afford to go, if you contact whoever's running the D&D or Pathfinder, whatever game you play, and say, "Hey, I will run games for you," most of the time you run enough, and they will give you a free ticket.
Right.
And they will also give you a free room if you run enough. And that's how I went to most of these conventions. It meant that I was spending the entire weekend playing D&D, but that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
And because of that, in a couple of years, I got a few thousand hours of playtime. And what that meant was, for me, playing a character effectively as written became really, really boring because I saw them over and over. So I like to make really unique, weird, interesting characters. I tend to prefer feats versus multi-classing to make my weird kick of characters, but they both work equally well. And going back to the Sword Bard, Blade Flourish is a perfect example of a great multi-class of ability because it only takes 3 levels of investiture, but it massively changes how you play the character. And those are the things I think are the most fun. It's another reason why I tend to prefer subclasses that mention, that specifically give you, upgrade their abilities that you get at 3rd level, just so you still have an incentive to stay in that subclass. Whereas this one, Master's Flourish is nice, but you can get the entire benefit of this subclass at level 3.
Absolutely.
And you can be your fighter. You could even use this on something a little bit more interesting. Like if you went Blade Dancer, or not Blade Dancer. What's it called? The wizard subclass that uses swords. They're elvish.
I don't remember, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I feel dumb that I can't think about it.
That's okay. It's a dumb subclass anyway. No,
I love that subclass. Blade singing. That's what it's called. Blade singer. Right. I had to look it up. I was going to go nuts. You could create a really interesting blade singer with this that feels more blade singery, to be blunt.
Or not even a blade singer. To me, and I know I'm coming out of left field with this. If I was to write up a Gandalf character,
oh yeah,
because that dude was persuading and talking stuff left and right, but would whoop some ass with his staff and sword. Yeah. No problem at all. It just, and it's like I was saying, it gives that flavor to something else. It doesn't overpower him. It doesn't make him, but man, does it make him stand out from the standard archetype of whatever that class is.
Yeah. And again, that's the things that I really love, and it's something I think 5th edition does better than any previous edition. Mm-hmm. Is the idea that you can create weird characters in 5th edition without needing a doctorate. Again, one of the things about Pathfinder and the 3rd edition that is always told to me is, well, it's so customizable. No, it's so confusing. Any character you can create in Pathfinder or 3rd edition, I can create in 5th edition. I can generally get them to do the same thing a few levels earlier, just because there's so much crunch built into those systems.
Well, it goes back to the system mastery thing we're talking about. Those games are half the fun and draw of those games. They attract the type of player that enjoys system mastery. And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Absolutely.
But it's required. You have to understand the entire career progression of your character in 3rd edition. Because if you're making bad choices along the way, well, guess what? You paint yourself into a corner, buddy. Mm-hmm. And now your upper level play is poo-poo. It's
remarkably easy to make a useless character in 3rd edition because I've done it. I've done it so many times. Sure. Whereas in 5th edition, it's remarkably difficult to make a useless character. Yes. You can make underpowered characters, but it's really difficult to make a useless character. And really, the only way I've ever seen a useless character was Patrick Rothfuss. When he played with Acquisitions Incorporated, the C team, he created a character where every level he just picked a different class. So he was level 1 in like 4 or 5 different classes.
Sure.
And it's Patrick Rothfuss.
Right.
It's always going to be fun to watch him play. And it was meant to be a joke character. But that is the only time I've ever seen a useless character. Other than that, it's really cool and interesting. And so, anyway, since we are going a little bit close to time, just before we get to our final section, what is one flavor of Bard you've either seen in other systems or just in other forms of media that you're like, I would love to see this in 5th edition?
I have been toying with an idea. It is not fully fleshed out by any stretch of the imagination. Please understand this. But as an extension of my love for bards that speak, um, I would love to see, and I don't know what the right word is, the Eulogy College. I would love to see, a bard that excels in resource management and dungeon delving, that gains benefits based on previous creatures defeated to give bonuses in future encounters through a mechanism
Ooh.
of eulogies and presiding over the dead. Like we have grave clerics, which are a very interesting take on things. I would like to see something like that with bards. And you get that a little bit in the College of Whispers.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's 6th level things, this Mantle of Whisper thing where they assume the face and can disguise themselves as the deceased that dies near them. But the rest of that college doesn't really have the same flavor.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see something like that and pulled into a more long-term solution for adventuring. Like, I think of, a class or subclass like that being useful in things like Dungeon of the Man Mage or things like that,
Mm-hmm.
where you're just delving for a long
Absolutely.
time. And being able to carry forward bonuses from one encounter to another is an interesting thing that I've never really seen done too much, and I think would be fun to do.
Absolutely. There in the 14 Final Fantasy 14 thing I did, one of the classes they tried to do and it didn't work was the Blue Mage. I don't know if you're familiar with Final Fantasy in general. So Blue
I
Mage
don't do Final Fantasy.
makes perfect sense. Blue Mages, their ability to cast blue magic is effectively they learn enemy abilities, and the way they learn them is the enemy uses the ability on them, and if they survive the fight, they learn that ability. And they can be super, super broken in some Final Fantasy Giga games. They did a version of it in Final Fantasy 14, which doesn't work super well. It's the redheaded stepchild of the Final Fantasy 14 classes. And then this guy Soren, who did all these other things, tried to turn it into a 5th edition thing, and it just didn't work. But the thing I kind of pitched to him about that, I think your idea of kind of a resource management based bard that a bard of eulogies or things like that could fit in the same wheelhouse, I would say, as like a blue mage style thing, where depending on what you kill and depending on what combats have been previously, you would have different things that you could do. It's something that would require a ton of playtesting and a really high-minded idea, a really high-minded understanding of how 5th edition works. But I think it would probably be one of the most unique classes. And again, when we talk about inspiring players and incentivizing players to understand the whole party, that would be the kind of subclass that would excel. Especially if you had things like the choice between, okay, well, you fought 5 different creatures. Depending on which one you eulogize, and you only can eulogize one for one reason or another, will give you different benefits. Or maybe the order of the creatures dying changes things. Like, that would incentivize the entire party to work around the bard, and I think it would be really cool.
Me too. That's
yeah. So yeah, cool idea. Any of you guys watching, start thinking.
Yeah, someone smarter than me figure it out so I can.
It's my favorite thing in the world where people go, oh, well, this is how it should work. Well, it doesn't work that way. Well, someone smarter than me should figure out how to do that. Fine. Let's go find super smart person. So anyway.
I'm an idea guy. That's all I got.
Final thoughts. Overall, like we said before, the Bard, even 5th edition itself is highly customizable. The Bard is your ultimate custom class. It really, really is. Depending on the subclass that you choose, depending on the spells that you choose, the feats that you choose, this is a really, really cool, interesting, very flavorful class. And when you are homebrewing for it, giving interesting uses for bardic inspiration, giving different ways to use your spell slots. These are all things that can create really interesting, fun, unique to play subclasses. Jeff, final thoughts for you?
Yeah, my final thought for anyone watching this is don't be afraid of the bard. Uh, a lot of people don't take this class. They don't get it. They don't think it can hold up. I'm telling you, I have played more bards in 5e than any other class. And I am telling you that they are the money linchpin clutch guy of many a combat. It's very fun to do. Even if you're not a naturally, outgoing person, you can do a lot of things via die roll. I like bards because I just get to, just run over things at the table with my mouth. Like it's great. It's fun to me. But don't be afraid of picking up a bard, and don't be afraid of thinking outside the box, because it literally is the easiest class out there, and to kind of find multiple avenues, kind of the path least taken way to many solutions. And a lot of the published adventures out there give a lot of ability. There's a lot of chances for players to really excel with persuasion, deception, and performance checks. Um, Learn to love them, because they really spice up the game, and they will keep not only your DM on their toes, they'll keep other players on their toes too, which is always nice.
Yeah.
It saves the table from boredom. I love having bards at the table.
Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All of those things are super important. In the comments down below, what is your favorite version of a bard? Do you like the Witcher style? I can't remember his actual name now. Bard from there? Do you like the more high magic bard? Do you prefer the old version of the more rogue-like bard? Let me know in the comments down below. Real quick, Jeff, if people want to find you on the interwebs, where would they go?
The best place to find me is at the Mighty Jerd. That's Jerd. You can find me there on Twitter or on Instagram, mostly on Twitter. But yeah. If you want to talk about D&D, you want to talk about bards, you want to talk about your favorite bard in fiction, that's another one to leave in the comments below. I would love to see who your favorite fictional bard is, and you got to tell me why it's Chaucer from A Knight's Tale. Boom, done.
Love it! Anyway, again, that is all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye.